Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Operations Room, a podcast for COOs. I am Brandon Mensinga, joined by my lovely co-host Bethany Ayers. As always, how are you doing this morning?
I feel very tired. Don't know if there's any reason for it, but that's where I'm going to go.
So what constitutes the tiredness as of this particular week?
So I don't know about you, but I feel like, or I know because I now have an Apple Watch that tells me everything, that I sleep less the lighter it gets. Even though the room has blackout blinds, somehow I'm just up more.
Your body is sensing it, sensing the shift.
It is. And so in the winter, I think I sleep about an average of 9 hours a night. And right now,
9? What?
And it's lovely. And right now I'm getting about 7. One of those things we don't talk about in summertime. We're all so excited to have it and some natural light and a bit of vitamin D that we forget that we don't actually sleep. Part of the joy.
I went to the rooftop of our office that I'm in now, and the rooftop, I think in London sometimes you don't expect a lot from these rooftops, but the rooftop was spectacular. They had like 3 couches, 2 of those like swinging things, or not couches, but what do they call those things? Little pods, I guess, like greenery outside and just like beautiful sun. The view wasn't that great, but it was just awesome for like a lunchtime chill out.
So you're back in proper London then? Our new offices, or the UiPath offices, are in the center of the city on Bishopsgate. We're on the 50th floor.
50th floor. Jesus. Where's Bishopsgate?
Bishopsgate is where Salesforce Tower is, and it just has a row of tall buildings now.
So that sounds super corporate. Massive skyscrapers, and you're on the 50th floor.
So it's a pretty amazing view. We look down on the Gherkin from where we are, and it's south facing. So you can see all the way to Canary Wharf and the Thames and everything, but very hot. So you get the view in the morning and then the sun comes round and all of the shades go up and you could be anywhere. You'd have no idea.
So what's happening? So the acquisition has happened. We haven't chatted in quite some time. How are things checking out?
I don't really know how much I can share and what is worth sharing. Everybody's very friendly, very nice, very helpful. But they're just a lot of everybody's, and trying to figure out who the right everyone is to talk to is still a challenge.
I think when we got bought by Microsoft, that was actually one of the most problematic areas. Like we're like this miniature Swiftkey in London, separated from the mothership. Just trying to figure out like who we're supposed to be talking to about all sorts of things was madness. Like trying to find people, teams, like who we needed to ask for certain things. It was full on.
The one benefit that we have is a quarter of the company is based in Bucharest. And therefore, it's only a 2-hour time difference, and we're not dealing with 8 hours. Because I can imagine with Microsoft, you're spending a lot of time waiting for people to wake up.
So we've got a great topic for today, which is the pitfalls on the path to exit. And we have an amazing guest for this, which is Dirk Sahlmer. He's the head of Origination. I always love this terminology for VCs or people that buy these companies, head of Origination. In any event, he works for the saas.group, saas.group, as it were. So with Dirk, he talked about this fundamental idea of bringing your business in order to make it acquirable. And by bringing your business in order, he was talking about reporting, KPIs, documentation of processes for that smaller kind of acquisition, reducing the key man risk. And also saying that if he's trying to acquire a company of that nature and it takes them forever to respond to things, or there's a lack of clarity around their numbers or whatever, it just makes him, as part of the acquirer, super nervous, and it does not help that company wanting to be bought in this case. And I'm just wondering what you make of this idea of bringing your business in order and how important that is.
As a COO, it's obviously very important and basically the reason why we're there. Without it, we're not doing our job very well. Doesn't mean it's always easy, but it's part of professionalizing the business. I guess the bigger question is, what's the priority order? Actually,
and as a side note, one company ago, at the leadership level, there was like pushback on pulling our shit together for a fundraising event in this case. So not an acquisition, but it was for fundraising purposes. Why would we proactively build like a due diligence room and spend the time and effort to do this stuff? Why don't we just wait until we're asked for whatever documentation? And I remember having this debate back and forth with this person, and ultimately they won. So we ended up kind of doing this like responsive thing, if you want to call it that. And as you'd imagine, the outcome was the fundraising event didn't take 3 months or 4 months. It took like 9 months because of this ridiculous, like all over the place situation that was happening at the time. So to your point, as an operations professional, getting burned firsthand of seeing what that looks like and the mess that's created, I'm very adamant these days that It is entirely possible to do 3 months for a fundraise, maybe not for an exit or for an M&A in this case, but definitely from a fundraise standpoint. Get your shit in order, pull the stuff together, make sure you have it there. And like you've mentioned on some previous podcasts, even before that, just like having a DD room there where as you progressively build stuff in your company and kind of monthly P&L statements at the end of the month and so on, just drop them in there. So by the time you actually get to this stuff, it's not like a huge exercise.
So there's that side of it. And then also one is that they have the information, but the reason why fundraisers or acquirers will be freaking out is if none of it's pulled together, then they'll be wondering how you run your business and if there's any clarity in the day-to-day operations. And so I don't think it should just be about gathering it ready for a fundraise, but it should also be that you are operating the business with some KPIs that are reasonable and you're checking. And maybe it's not, small business doesn't need all of the reporting in the world, but there should be some level of consistent reporting and a cycle of the team getting together to look at those numbers and course correct.
Yeah. And then getting to your point just around the prioritization of what's important in that DD room or what's like the bigger lifts, I guess. How would you describe that or what should we think about?
So the one that companies seem to really struggle with in that size that I can see, particularly the smaller, like the sub 5 million, let's say, is just having a good business model that they can share. Because oftentimes there's no finance resource. You're using a bookkeeper to send invoices. I've seen where companies have bookkeepers that have no SaaS experience, so they're not like really building a budget that is based on SaaS. Or you work with these outsourced CFO companies, and then they build too big and too complicated a budget and model that you can't understand and isn't tied to your actual growth metrics. And so it's either like invest in a finance person and get a budget that's a real budget that has a budget and model that has all the financial metrics that it should, or at a minimum, have a model that reflects your business drivers, even if it doesn't have a real P&L and balance sheet and cash flow. Like, even if you don't have that level of understanding, to at least have a model of, if I have these many people or this many leads, how much money am I going to make?
Sorry, by business model, you mean is like manifested in a financial forecast of some sort that actually shows how the drivers of how you make money parlays itself into an actual future.
And then how you're performing against that future.
It's interesting. The current company that I've joined, it is absolutely remarkable. They are late Series A, on the cusp of a Series B, 80 people, quite a bit of revenue coming down the pipe right now, a great pipeline in front of it. The entire financial back end of the company was essentially the CEO founder with 6 different spreadsheets and a junior operations person doing all the payables and receivables and all that jazz, and a third person kind of doing like revenue ARR reconciliation type stuff. And between the three of them, they've got to this stage of the company's evolution. As we're heading towards the Series B, we definitely need to hire a head of finance or a finance director to come in to kind of look at what is actually happening and just make sure that the backward-looking side of the company, the controller side of things, all of it's in place in terms of the track record of the company. And then financial forecast-wise, really leveling up our financial forecast to ensure that it really represents the reality of the business as we kind of head into the Series B, where we can, as you said, take the business model and represent it in a way that is very clear, hopefully fairly accurate, and gives the investor or potential investors really good confidence in the potential of the business.
And that's definitely on the 5 million plus in terms of if you're looking for an acquirer. I think grouping 0 to 10 together or 2 to 10, you need to professionalize somewhere on your journey from 5 upwards, unless all you're doing are super huge deals and you have 5 customers. Like, there's a level of complexity that starts to come in before 10 that you need to get ready for.
What will be the second big one, do you think?
Your monthly reporting pack, demonstrating how you run the business and that you're on top of the business. So whatever your MBR equivalent is, and even if it's like 1 scorecard, that's enough. So it's like kind of like a board pack, but a bit lighter weight. You don't have to share all of it, but share some sort of continuity of this is what we look at. And these are the types of discussions that we have, ideally with targets against those numbers. again, to show some planning. So how many leads have you created? What are your daily active users, monthly active users, whatever, some sort of thing, like what's your shipping? The scorecard of your top KPIs or like one performance metric per department, or, like as you've gotten together, or your OKRs, like whatever it is that you use as a management team to decide whether or not you're going in the right direction.
As an example, in your leadership weekly, you have a scorecard or health metrics that you're looking at that's tracked week to week or whatever it is, month to month, and having that historical archive of that clearly laid out and dropped somewhere where they can see what it is you're discussing.
Yeah, I mean, or not even at a historic, because I think for historics, you could just use your board pack as long as your board pack has something in it. I would even just have an example of how you've run the last quarter, or, talk through how you operate the business so that you look somewhat grown up.
Okay. So more of like talking points.
You could just have like an example of one. So in our monthly business review or our weekly business review, this is what we look at. These are the types of conversations we have. And then the other thing is you're always going to be asked for customer references. And so make sure that you know which customers are the ones that would be good references, and just kind of treat them quite well. You have your champion customers, I don't want to call them, like your gold star customers, the ones that for whatever reason you click with, they're early adopters, they like you like them, they'll say anything you need them to say to a fundraiser or an investor or acquirer. Take them out to dinner regularly, know if they're having a new baby and give them a present, like just make them feel special, not all the time, but just keep them happy and ready and able to do those last minute customer references for you.
All right, so let's park it here and let's move on to our conversation with Mr. Dirk Sahlmer. We are revving up the engine of the podcast and looking for a great brand to sponsor the show. We have over 7,000 listeners now across COOs, CEOs, founders, and operational professionals who are decision makers for all kinds of technology, including HR, planning, strategy, legal, and other tools.
It's Beth here. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the podcast, and we'd love to keep it going, but we're going to need to get some sponsors in order to do that. So if you work at a company that could benefit from speaking to listeners like you, or know of a company that might benefit, please send them our way.
To find out more, go to operationsroom.co/sponsorship. That is operationsroom.co/sponsorship.
I thought it would be quite good to kick off with, I can share all of the mistakes that we made along the way. And I think probably one of them was not a mistake, but didn't realize the complexity of having an Indian entity as part of it. I thought it'd be quite helpful to start with, like, what are the mistakes that you see people make that makes the actual acquisition really hard that you could maybe fix ahead of time?
You already mentioned one point is like the entity setup. What we sometimes see is that people think to maybe serve US customers, you need to set up another US entity and maybe even move some people there, employ some people there. Then you move to another market, set up an office and an entity there, which makes the whole conglomerate, even just for a small SaaS, very complex. And we already walked away from some opportunities just because it was too complex. Like the IP was in one entity, employees were employed through another entity, and then they had some nearshoring or offshoring teams sitting somewhere else. So it's the easier you make it for an acquirer to understand your business and to close the actual transaction, the higher the probability to close. Then also documentation of processes, reducing key man risks. So just like an acquirer comes in and they see how the business works, like how the reporting lines are, which processes are in place, that not everything is dependent on the founders or even like some key employees. This makes your business look much better in front of investors and makes it easier for them to review and analyze and understand what's going on.
What is it that you can preemptively work on to ensure that you get the maximum valuation?
I mean, I talked about the documentation already. So that also applies, of course, to like code base and technical things. Then prepare your numbers. So if you don't have like a CFO already or someone who's helping you with financials and your KPIs, implement proper reporting, proper metrics tracking so you can deliver the most important KPIs. Because this is always the first obstacle in the first call. If I ask founders, sellers about most basic SaaS KPIs and they just can't provide it, and then they say, hey, let me look this up for you. And then it takes them 3 weeks. So you always have to understand that you're creating a bias on buyer's side. So the more they're thinking, okay, you don't have your business in order or you can't deliver things on short notice, the more suspicious it seems. And the deeper they might dig, or they might just walk away from the deal because they think it's just a mess and they will never get through it.
All of a sudden I realized we should probably provide a bit of context on the size of businesses we're talking about, stage, what your thesis is around acquiring, and maybe like take it a step back so people have more context.
With SaaS Group, we are mainly targeting small capital efficient companies, and the revenue range is between 2 and 10 million. So I would say the smallest team size we ever acquired was just 2 people. And the biggest we ever acquired was around 30, 35. It's rather small. It's not those typical scale-ups, 100, 200, 300 people. So we're mainly focusing on smaller companies. And I think you also have to take into account that M&A is our bread and butter. So we're doing 5 to 10 transactions a year. So if I talk about acquisitions and the process, that means we have a well-oiled machine. We're doing this every day. And it's the core of our model. When you sell to a strategic who has never done it before, or a strategic that does maybe one transaction every 3 years, then it's a totally different game. It takes longer. It's more complex. What you also need to add is we acquire companies and we keep them as is. So we keep the same team usually. We keep the same brand, the same name. So the company itself stays as is. And of course, there's integration projects. You connect them to internal communication channels like Slack, Google Workspace, and so on. We do not need to evaluate like product synergies, tech stacks, technical integrations, and so on. So I would say if you compare it to a strategic exit, it's much more straightforward and much easier and less time consuming. I think if you're selling to a strategic, at the end of the day, could take a year or longer, while it only takes weeks with us.
So there's a whole bunch of companies that are either seed funded or Series A funded, where they're in that 5 to 10 million pound range, and all of them are struggling. They don't have the right metric set for a Series B or a follow-on round. They're not quite profitable, but they're almost profitable. They've got decent revenue. They've got a decent customer base, like some level of PMF, but they're like floating and there's like nowhere to really go essentially. So when you look at companies like that, either what do you recommend them to do, or if you're looking at acquiring those kind of companies, what are you actually looking for to decipher if there's something there?
Yeah, so I think the issue with those kind of companies is that they can't do that mindset shift from growing at all costs and like potentially overspending to becoming more frugal, more sustainable. This is also why we don't necessarily want to do those deals. I mean, we also look at what I would call failed VC cases, but the usual problem is they are not capital efficient enough because they're coming from a background of like there was more money than they earned and they spend it on things which haven't had necessarily the biggest ROI. And so what I encourage those companies to do is to have a plan B. Let's call it bootstrap future, where you really trim down the company to what's really needed to run it. And I mean, you can still like go from there and start hiring again if the company continues to grow, but you can't keep like a high burn multiple or high S&M spend if your company is growing like 10, 20% versus maybe 100, 150% before. So I would say it totally makes sense. I mean, I would even encourage it to very early stage companies, but to have a plan B with like concrete action points. What are the main cost items? What do I really need? And how long does it take me to cut it back? Maybe. I mean, staff cost is usually the highest cost item, unfortunately. But then there are other things like SaaS tools you haven't used a lot, or you're going to conferences that don't bring any sales, but cost you a lot for the booth and everything and to bring people there. So it really makes sense to have such a list of action items if you need it.
Does that mean that you're mostly acquiring bootstrapped companies? Is that part of your thesis?
Yeah, I would say some companies are also lightly VC funded. So they raise like a pre-seed round, seed round, and then they realize, okay, this is not becoming a skyrocket thing, and then focus more on profitability and growing this sustainably with lower growth rates ultimately. But I think Series A stage is basically the point where you need to decide if you really want to go big or focus more on a sustainable path, because post Series A, the valuations are crazy. You have a high liquidation preference. You've raised a lot of money. And if you then don't make it, then I have some conversations with founders. They would just walk home with $0 on exit, even though they put in blood, sweat, and tears for like almost a decade, which is sad.
And so how does your model work? Do you buy companies and then take out the back office for synergies, and then they're profitable and use the cash that they generate to buy the next company?
Yeah, it's very close to what you're saying. So as I said, we buy those companies as is. So we keep everything, the team, the brand, the name. And those companies usually are under-optimized in certain areas. I mean, you cannot be an expert in everything. Like even saas.group is not an expert in everything. But we see certain synergies, but we also see potential for improvement in, for example, pricing, in sales and marketing, in other things. And so we buy those companies with a certain hypothesis to help them grow to the next level. And then we have a central operations team. It's around 50 to 60 people internally, with product experts, with marketing experts, pricing experts, internal BI, internal AI, and then just standard things like HR, finance, accounting. So most founders I talk to, they don't like admin topics that much. So they are happy to give it away. And then we're trying to help very hands-on, but with the existing team. So usually they have some marketing folks or product folks, and we just support them with expertise and resources.
And you basically keep their engineers.
Correct. Yes. I would say the typical profile of those companies is very good tech foundation. So strong product in a niche, very sticky clients. So the foundation is great, but then they are under optimized in GTM, like go to market. And maybe they've never tackled internationalization, or they are struggling with it. And then these are the topics where we can help with if we see the potential. And at the same time, it also provides an exit for the founders, because that's usually outside of their comfort zone, because they never started to build something like super huge.
So then if we circle back to the beginning of the conversation, so you've identified a company or a set of companies that are interesting to you on first pass. And when you start going through the due diligence and kind of quasi-buying process with the founder or the CEO of the board or whatever, what are the different things, the different areas that make you nervous along that pathway? So you pointed one out previously, which is SaaS metrics and reporting. They don't know what they're doing. They're very, very slow. They have to they take 3 weeks to get a non-recurring, whatever, an NDR number type of thing. What else in that plot makes you nervous that you see where it makes you think twice?
I would say one common theme is key man risk, that, for example, the founder is doing still all sales calls and stuff like that. So this is maybe hard to transfer, or at least an execution risk for us. Also, if the founder is like a micromanager and basically like involved in all day-to-day topics, but it also depends on the deal structure preferences. So if this founder wants to leave ASAP, then it's maybe an issue. If this founder says, hey, I would like to partner up with you and stay for 2+ years, then it's a different thing, because then we can work on a proper transition and maybe hire a successor or promote from within. Another deal breaker is technical debt, or like if the code base is a total mess. So we will always do a tech due diligence. And if this product is like 10, 15, 20 years old and has never been updated to most recent frameworks, we even had a case where you struggle to hire developers for the coding language that was used. This would also be a deal breaker for us. Customer concentration. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, because as a startup, you're probably happy to sign that big client, and that maybe makes up half of your revenue. But if you're entering M&A conversations, then it becomes an issue, because let's assume you have a 5 million business, but 2 million of that revenue comes from just one client, or maybe 3 million comes from top 5 clients. That's a risk for us if they churn, even if they have multi-year contracts. And so we would always factor in a discount, or even say, okay, this is too big of a risk for us, and wouldn't do the deal.
So if you had to, from your point of view, lay out what you think would be the ideal expectations for operations within that company that you would want to see or want that operator to be focused on, can you give us a broader scope of what you think those areas would be?
The more that is documented and the more things that are clear to a buyer, when you look at those companies more in depth, the better it is. And it definitely helps if someone like a COO type of person already prepares everything and gets stuff together. So in the due diligence, we have a checklist with like 200 items, all the company data, incorporation documents, etc., like numbers, vendor contracts, open source frameworks used, etc., tech stack, org charts, and all that stuff. So it would be good for such a person to already like bring everything together instead of waiting for the buyer to request it. And I mean, you just need to Google it. There are lots of checklists publicly available. Just take one, bring everything together. And I mean, for our target group, they often don't have it. Something is not applicable on that checklist. They need to create it on short notice. And we are, I would say, not that strict. So sometimes we are just fine with like 5 sentences in a Google Doc to explain how the current situation is. But if you really aim to sell to a strategic acquirer, they may be more strict about such things.
A lot of the content, I guess, that people are looking for is the same that you need for a fundraise. And so when we've talked about fundraising in the past and keeping a data room or a VDR open all the time so that it's just easier to do a fundraiser, easier to do an acquisition. So for listeners, I'd recommend if you have a board, your redacted board notes go in already, because you can redact it straight after the meeting and you don't have to go back and go through all of your minutes and take things out. Then your key contracts, both supplier and customer key contracts, key employment contracts, insurance certificates, list of the code that you use, or the technology that you use. If you just keep some of these documents live and updated as you grow, it's a lot easier when the list lands. Your management accounts every month and the most recent version of your model. And I think that would be at least enough to get people started while you gather the rest.
Agrees. And I mean, you also have to consider for strategic acquirers, for example, they may have like 5 companies on their priority list they are looking to acquire, maybe even 5 direct competitors, and they only want to acquire one, and they are talking to all 5. So if you are faster in delivering and they get started on yours, they may deprioritize others. So speed is sometimes key here. And there's this saying, time kills deals, and I can confirm it. So if it takes you weeks to deliver, also for us as a serial acquirer, as I said, we want to do a couple of deals every year. If it takes you 6-8 weeks to deliver just the basic stuff, we may need to jump on another opportunity that's coming in and deprioritize yours. And then you may get a chance further down the line if we close that transaction or if it fell through, or you may never get a chance again because we just moved on and priorities have changed.
So I'd like to change direction for a little bit because of my operations hat on and learn a bit more about those 50 people in your business that are running these other businesses. Like, you have a COO, you have a CFO. Do you do all of your legals in-house? Do you do your DD in-house? Like, what have you created as your own business to be very efficient at acquiring others and then running them afterwards?
Yeah, so we are still a very small M&A team to start with, maybe. So we are 7 people. We have 2 juniors, mainly for lead generation, then 2 more senior people, including me, to do the first discovery calls and to drive opportunities into later stages. Then we have our head of M&A and my other colleague who's associate director. They are for deal execution. So if I say, look, we agreed on high level terms, they are looking to sell, business seems to be a fit for us, then they would take over and structure the diligence process and create like an investment hypothesis. Then we have one integration person. So he takes care of all the integration projects once we are about to close a new transaction. Internally, the biggest team is marketing, because that's usually the under-optimized area I was talking about earlier. What I forgot to mention is we also mainly focus on product-led growth companies, not so much enterprise SaaS solutions that have like a longer sales cycle. So we do not necessarily need to help companies with outbound sales and scaling the sales team, but rather like marketing, meaning SEO, PPC kind of things. So this is our biggest team with almost 20 people. Then we have a smaller product team. I think it's around 5 to 10 people with designers, UX, UI designers, and product experts. And so it's always about providing sparring. It's never, hey, we tell you what features to build or we build product for you even. It's always like, hey, you can ask us anytime. In the due diligence process, we would define maybe some small tweaks we would do to the product, improving, for example, the onboarding process, activation process, and so on. But it's never, hey, we take over for you. Yeah, with HR, I mean, they are taking care of all the employment contracts and all HR related topics. We also have in-house recruiters. So basically the companies we acquire just need to provide a job description, hop on a quick call with the recruiters, tell them what they need, and then they will go out and source great candidates. What you said, monthly management accounts, etc., is for our finance team. So they will take care that every company gets their monthly financials prepared. We have a small AI team. Again, they are not building AI features for you, but they can talk to you and discuss like low-hanging fruits where you can build AI features rather than maybe just sprinkling some AI fairy dust over it.
What? Just AI fairy dust? I mean, that's the solution to everything, isn't it?
Yeah. So what else do we have? A small BI team. So we have a unified dashboard for all brands. So we can see how the brands are performing, how the MRR is growing, what their retention is. You can even run cohort analysis. So it's a bit like a cockpit where you can see all numbers from the brands. And they also help with due diligence topics. And so regarding to the second part of your question, how does the due diligence work? We try to make as much as possible in-house, because what we want to avoid is hire someone who just does a checkbox exercise and provides us with a long report. We pay for it and people never look at it again. So we want to understand the business ourselves and really dig deeper. We have a legal general counsel, but it's just a fractional general counsel. So depending on where we do the acquisition, it depends a lot on the geography. I work together with local people.
Right. I mean, I don't know what your process is like, but I guess with a strategic, like I am in awe of the lawyers, the hours they work and how they always stay so fresh. I don't know how they do it. And then they do it over and over again. It's like my idea of hell. I want to ask another question about your internal systems, if that's okay, Brandon. We're always on the hunt for good technology, and we're at a point right now where there's some new, better, improved things coming out. And I'm always curious about the disruptors. So what are you using back office wise?
For the due diligence process, I mean, some M&A brokers we work with sometimes, they are not happy about it, but we actually use G Drive for the due diligence process and not some data room software that's even more secure.
I mean, I think data rooms have pretty much died for the mid-market and smaller businesses. I think everything's Google or SharePoint.
And then when it comes to BI dashboards and reporting, what are you using there?
Yeah, we are using Metabase for setting up the dashboards. I probably get like inbound messages 2-3 a month about people trying to sell me BI tools. Our BI team opted for Metabase and it works just great. A lot of our companies are on Stripe, so it's very easy to set up those dashboards if we make a new acquisition, and they are quite happy with it.
Do you get to save some money on your Stripe fees? Like, can you actually negotiate en masse, or is it impossible to ever negotiate with Stripe to get some?
Yes. Funnily enough, the announcement is still to come, but we negotiated with Stripe. I think there's now like a partnership agreement, so we get better terms than you would get yourself with your small SaaS business. So there's some optimization potential. I mean, it will not save you like hundreds of thousands of euros, but it can become quite expensive. So I think we got pretty good terms. And we also tried it for other businesses. So because we don't integrate solutions into each other and don't do like cross-selling, upselling synergies, at least not to date. We have like other synergies that you wouldn't see on the website or somewhere else. So as an example, Scrape API, our scraping company, is being used by all of our SEO software companies, for example. So we're trying to dog food a lot of our solutions internally where it's possible. And we also try to negotiate, because now as a group, you have more leverage in those kind of negotiations, also for hosting.
So maybe coming back to how you describe the organization and your role within it, I'm very curious because you kind of do more at the top of funnel. Have you had any kind of just like really surprises where down funnel, when due diligence is happening, you really have a great company on the hook, so to speak, and things blow up right at the very end?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing, or to frame it maybe differently, we always try to avoid those things to happen, because if it blows up at the end of the process, that means a lot of people were getting involved and we spend a lot of time on it. So we try to do more and more very early in the funnel to disqualify companies so nobody else is getting involved and wasting the time with it. It's still not possible. I mean, you will always have those cases. I would say very early when I started my job at SaaS Group, this was already 4 years ago, there was a late stage discussion with the founders. We already identified growth levers and how we can support them and everything. And then the founder at the end said, "Oh yeah, these are all great ideas. I will now do them myself." So he basically, bailed out and executed on all those topics we discussed himself. I don't know if it worked out. He then ultimately sold to another company. We also had one case. The founder was hesitant to sign a non-compete, and then very late in the process, we learned that he already set up a new entity and was basically in the process of building a direct competitor, which was more modern than the business he was about to sell to us. And in this case, we walked away. We had a MarTech business where we learned that most of the customers are gun shops and betting platforms. Also a case we couldn't get comfortable with, unfortunately. So yeah, very funny stories sometimes. But it also works the other way around. So sometimes you think, this is not an ideal fit. And the more you learn, the more you think, okay, this is a really good fit. So yeah, but these are some interesting businesses. But again, we have still a pretty high conversion rate from like we signed an LOI to we closed the deal. We also want to maintain a very good reputation in the market, not just inflationary, sign some LOIs and then figure out how the business looks like afterwards. So there's a lot of stuff happening pre-LOI already.
So has that a trend that's also happened in exits as that's happened in fundraising? Like when I first started being involved in fundraising, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, you would get the LOI fairly early and then all the DD happened afterwards. And now there's a huge amount of DD that happens pre-LOI. And it's not called DD, but like it's a lot of the stuff that happened post. And so then from LOI to close, it really is mostly just like deep financials, deep tech, and the legals. And so it's much shorter. Is that the same that's happening for exits?
Yes. In our case, it is like that. So we do a lot of stuff pre-LOI to really know, okay, LOI means handshake, and there's like a 95% of deal closing ultimately. So we call it pre-LOI DD, and what happens post-LOI is mostly confirmatory. So how we usually go about it is we analyze high-level stuff in the M&A team. We build an investment case. So we have different kind of cases we evaluate, and this defines what's going to happen in the subsequent steps. So what are we going to prove? What is the data we are requesting first? And what are the boxes we need to check to move forward with an LOI? So to mention a few, so we have, I think, 4 categories. One is growth continuation. So business that's looking pretty decent, good retention, good growth rates, sustainable, where we say, okay, we could also just be hands off and it will not like tank tomorrow, but we still see maybe small improvements and tweaks we can make. Then there's growth redesign, where we say, okay, with our help, we can probably bring this business in a better shape. So increase growth rates because their marketing is maybe inefficient or they're not doing the right marketing, and we see some opportunities. With growth redesign, we would also evaluate what are the concrete growth levers and what's the execution risk for those growth levers. So for example, internationalization, price increases, improved marketing, and so on. And then we have profit continuation. That's like what the name already says. A company has higher profit margins, low to no growth, but pretty high retention for a PLG SaaS business. The last one is restructuring, how we call it. So that's, for example, a failed VC case that comes to us, has 10, 15 million, maybe liquidation preferences, hasn't come that far. So also just like maybe 2, 3, 5 million AR in a very inefficient way, in our opinion. But we see potential to put it on sustainable feet and go from there. And then it requires a bit more involvement from our side. That means we probably need to let go people. We need to cut costs, maybe close down the office, switch hosting provider, cut down sales and marketing spend, and so on. So this is higher risk, high execution risk, more involvement, and we really need to be confident that we can turn it around, because otherwise we would just pass on it.
And does that mean that you have different valuations based on the different hypotheses?
Yes, correct. And then maybe a smaller fifth one would be an add-on acquisition. So if we have an existing company that's doing well and it could make sense to run an add-on acquisition strategy, then we would maybe also look at acquiring smaller targets, maybe just have a few 100K ARR. So if it makes sense, and this would maybe deviate from our model, keeping brand name and everything intact. This would more be like, okay, we merge it with one of our existing brands.
So can you give like just a bit of a range for the failed VC model in terms of the multiple that you would provide? So let's just assume standard stuff, which is like almost profitable. They're going at, let's say, I don't know, like 30% year on year. They've got £5 million revenue. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so I would say those smaller SaaS transactions in general, like not only the failed VC cases, but those deals are usually between 1 and 5x revenue. Unless you have like top-notch KPIs, everything is well documented, the business is in the best shape ever, and it's a slightly strategic acquisition, maybe it's just hard to get like beyond 5. And for a restructure deal, I think you wouldn't get more than maybe 1.5x. So if it's like a really bad shape, very inefficient, and someone really needs to invest time and money to bring this back on a good growth path that's sustainable.
Oh, the market has changed. Remember those heady days of 2021 versus now? Wait, I mean, those kind of sound like a lot of the multiples I hear on the market.
If you're lucky, you can maybe get a 2x, but it's definitely not 5.
Unless you're like a super fast growing true AI company, but then those aren't the ones that you're acquiring at the moment. But those are where you see some of those multiples now. If our listeners can only take one thing away, what is it?
So before you're entering exit conversations, bring your business in order, come prepared, and know what you want. If it's a mess, and prepare the data, we talked about it, prepare the stuff, maybe even keep like a data room up to date every month, every quarter, whatever. And know what you want. Because if sellers or startups are talking to me and they say like, yeah, we don't really know what we want, like just offer something and then we can go from there. That's not something that's super helpful. So if you know, okay, I'm looking for a partner for the next growth phase and we know we are weak in those areas and we need someone to help us in these regards, that's much better. Also, if you say, hey, I'm not exiting below 5x revenue, that also makes it much easier for us to evaluate against it. So in regards to deal preferences and price expectations, it's super helpful because it just helps both sides save some time if it's not a fit.
Perfect. All right. It is time to wrap for the operations room. Thank you, Dirk, for joining us as a guest, and we will see you next week.